Welcome to the online training series on sustainable food in tourism, brought to you by the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. Thank you all very much for your interest and for connecting to this third session, which is focused on service and guest communication. I'm Roxana Ashtari, project specialist at the Sustainable Development of Tourism Department in UNWTO, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session today in collaboration with my colleague Svetlana Mikhailieva, coordinator of One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program based in United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. This session is focused on service and guest communication, and we'll discuss ways to gradually reduce unsustainable food components and replace them with more sustainable alternatives. Tips for appealing food and presenting will also be provided during this session, how to prevent food waste and encourage guests to consume more sustainably. So we will start this session with welcoming remarks and opening remarks from the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Territorial Cohesion, Energy Transition and Sea of France. The Ministry of Ecological Transition is actually the co-lead in the implementation of One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. And later on, we will introduce to you the joint program on sustainable food, where we are collaborating with different UN agencies and which provides the context for the implementation of these trainings. And then we will move into the actual training on service and guest communication. And basically, we will discuss mainly what aspects must be considered in sustainable menus design and how to communicate the sustainable food policies with our guests. And then the latest part of the training will be dedicated, hopefully, to Q&A, and please feel free to share your question in the chat with us. Before going any further ado, we would like to share with you some housekeeping rules. Please make sure that you mute yourself and your mics and cameras are disabled, since they are online training, so slightly different from the interactive webinar, so you can communicate with us through the chat. And we would welcome all of the questions via the chat during the Q&A session, so we will address all the questions at the end. Please indicate who you are with the name of your organization and later add your name, so it appears the name of your organization and your name, so we get to know who is attending today and we get to know each other in a virtual manner a little bit. And then we will try to address as many as questions possible during the Q&A and compile with them as we receive them. Please also make sure that this session is recorded, and if you stay with us, we assume that we have your consent, as the video is going to be live later in the website of the session, and you can access it later, and you can share it also in your network. So with any further ado, I hand over to Mr. Jean Godin, Policy Officer from the International and Multilateral Governance Unit from the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Territorial Cohesion, Energy Transition and Sea from the Government of France. Jean, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roxana. So good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to be here today to say a few words, as you said, in the name of the French Ministry for Ecological Transition, which is co-leading the Sustainable Tourism Program of the 10YFP with alongside Spain and WTO. So during the previous webinars, we had the occasion to recall the huge impact of food sectors in terms of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And if we want to achieve a sustainable consumption and production in the tourism sector, it is indeed necessary to connect sustainable food systems with tourism industry. So of course, this requires the engagement of all professionals working in these sectors, but also consumers, because we believe that tourists do have a key role to play to make sure less food is wasted and to encourage a stronger change in the industry. So if we want to go even further, I think we can all agree that consumers want to play this role. So if I may take just an example in France, because we do collect a lot of data on the tourism sector, all those data show that consumers want to be more and more actors of this sustainable tourism by consuming better, healthier, by paying professionals more equally, and by polluting less. So to support this trend, appropriate and targeted communication tools are, of course, needed to promote sustainable food services offer. And we believe it is crucial for tourism companies to know how to communicate to tourists sustainability messages so that efforts are perceived as a benefit rather than a constraint. So we hope this training will provide some response to your question on best ways how to communicate to tourists and to contribute to the behavioral change on the longer term. So with that, I wish you a good and fruitful webinar. And Roxana, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Very instructive and very straight to the point. So without any further ado, since we have a lot to share with you, I hand over to my colleague Svetlana to bring up some main points with you, and then we'll start the training. Over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and please do share back the PowerPoint on the screen. And thank you very much, Roxana, for the introduction, of course, and to you, Jean, for setting the scene for today's training session and for the precious support of the French government. And of course, very welcome to our distinguished participants. Thank you very much for your time. So today's session is part of the deliverables of a joint project titled Promoting Sustainable Food Consumption and Production Patterns through integrated tools, advocacy, and multi-stakeholder action. And it is supported by the One Planet Multi-Partner Trust Fund for Sustainable Development Goal 12. Some of you may have heard already about this project during our previous training session, so I will do again a very brief recap of the project to those who couldn't be with us for the previous trainings. The Multi-Stakeholder Trust Fund is connected to the activities of the One Planet Network. The One Planet Network has a direct mandate from the United Nations General Assembly to support the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 12 on sustainable consumption and production by 2030. And the project is implemented by 4 UN agencies. You can see their logos of this on the screen, so namely UNWTO, UNEP, UNDP, and FAO. And it addresses issues such as provision of support to governments around capacity building on sustainable food systems and development of a framework of action on food systems in tourism industry through major entry points and levers such as food waste reduction and procurement. And the project also links implementation of sustainable food systems to climate action, which connects with the work that we are doing under the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. And I see that many of the participants are already familiar with this initiative, which is great. Next slide, please, colleagues. So I would like also to drive your attention to a repository of tools and resources built by our program and related to the sustainable management of food in tourism industry. And here in this repository of tools, you can find toolkits on food waste reduction. You can find guidelines on sustainable management of food in tourism and awareness raising and training materials, which are of course directly connected with the topic of today's training. And in the database of tools, you can also find the Sustainable Food Manual published by Futurist, who is our partner for this online training series. And Futurist, as a reminder, is a German NGO, and its members are tour operators, hotels, and destinations, and they stand for preserving the heritage of holiday destinations and developing sustainable future for the travel industry. And this organization have extensive experience of implementing research and projects on sustainable food, including projects of in hotels and as well in cruise lines. So next, please. And the series of training that we are organizing is in partnership with Futurists are covering topics such as procurement, preparation, consumption, food waste. And as Roxana mentioned, in today's training, we will be focusing on service and guest communication. And as you know, sustainable menu planning is critical for the successful implementation of sustainable food policy. In this training, we will discuss on one side ways to gradually reduce unsustainable food components and replace them with more sustainable alternatives. And we will, of course, be providing tips for appealing food presentation and communication in order to encourage guests to consume more sustainably. Therefore, I have the pleasure and the honor to give the floor to our trainer, Professor Dagmar Lundur-Lascher, Dagmar is a professor of tourism management and currently works at the University for Sustainable Development Eberswalde in Germany and at the Institute for Sustainable Tourism in Vienna in Austria. And she's the author of numerous scientific publications in the field of corporate social responsibility, tourism and climate change, and sustainable food. And together with Food Tourist, she has conducted a number of research projects on sustainable food and tourism. So Dagmar, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Svetlana, for this nice introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Last training, we talked about the impacts of food on the environment, but also on cultural heritage and so on. Today, we are talking about how to create sustainable menus and also how to communicate it to our guests. So if you want to implement a successful sustainable food policy, the planning and composition of menus is very important. On the one side, you have to fulfill the guests' needs, but then you also want to meet your own sustainability goals. So it's a very challenging task to consider all the different aspects of sustainability when you design your menu. And therefore, it's very important that you do not all at once, but you initiate the process of implementing a sustainable food policy gradually and to change your menu step by step. So in fact, no other single decision in the kitchen is as important as the preparation and the design of menus. And because this is the point where you decide what is going to be cooked, when, and for whom. So next slide, please. Okay. So what do we have to consider when planning a menu? And that relates very much what have been said in the last training. So beef, meat, in general, and dairy products are very unsustainable elements of a menu, since their production results a high level of CO2 equivalent emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And diets which are rich in vegetables, in fruits, whole grains, nuts, and seeds have a much lower environmental impact than animal-based food. And today's average meat-based diet. There's also a growing health concern regarding meat consumption because processed meat is classified as carcinogenic to humans. But banning meat dishes from the menu may not be an option, but there are many ways to reduce it gradually and to replace it with other alternatives. So another point to consider is, besides having more plant-based dishes, is that in general you should prepare fresh food and not use convenience food. And there are several reasons for this, and especially your guests will appreciate it, and they will talk about fresh food later. Then also furthermore, when it comes to sustainable menu planning, you have to think about the ingredients you use. It's also important to think about the water and energy use and also the food waste your menu will then produce at the end. Next slide, please. So, eating habits and your food choice in your hotel or restaurant could make a significant contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. And there are several studies which have shown that a shift to a vegetarian diet could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to almost 50%. That's quite a lot. So sustainable eating habits could significantly contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Also, consuming a vegetarian diet is a growing trend within the industrialized countries. So, for example, vegetarians and vegans represent almost 10% of US, Canada, and UK population. And therefore, it's important that food service businesses consider these different eating styles. And there are many. And here you just have an overview about the most significant eating styles which can be found nowadays. So vegetarian is a very popular eating style, and there are several types of vegetarian diets. You see them here. So, for example, people who only consume egg products are over vegetarians, and lacto-vegetarians only consume dairy products. But then there is also another trend, which is vegan diet. And vegans do not consume any animal product or byproducts. So this is important to know. And there are other dietary forms like pescatarian, flexitarian, which you see here on this slide, and which we have to consider when we design the menu, because this different dietary forms are increasing and get more and more popular. Next slide, please. Yeah. In 2019, experts from the Eat Lancet Commission, which consisted of almost 40 scientists from 16 different countries, including climate researchers and nutritionists, they have created, they have proposed a special diet called Planetary Health Diet, with concrete reference values that can ensure a healthy diet for all people, and which is also good for the planet, for the environment. So this reference diet plan is intended to create a framework that is universally valid. But of course, cultural, religious, and geographical conditions must be taken into account when you create such a planetary health diet. And this diet plan, as you can see on the slide and in the graphic of the plate, is based mainly on vegetables and fruits, but also whole grains and other plant-based proteins such as legumes and nuts. Next slide, please. Okay. So with the food choices, food service businesses have a significant influence on greenhouse gas emissions, but also biodiversity and land use, because animal production is much worse for emissions, biodiversity and land use than plant production. What we have to do in order to move towards this planetary health diet is shown in this graph here. In this graphic, you can see that, or you can see a health boundary and our current average diets. The health boundary shows how the diet should actually be, or how the diet should be composed of which elements, and what our current average diet is. So according to this, we need to reduce significantly the consumption of meat and also starch elements such as potatoes. And on the other hand, the proportion of vegetables, legumes, whole grain products, nuts should increase significantly. So if you want to offer such a planetary health diet, then you would have to consider this health boundary and where to move to with the composition of your menu. Next slide, please. Yeah, I have mentioned that I would like to talk about fresh food because this is very important for the customers. What are the benefits of preparing fresh foods instead of using convenience food? It's on the one hand side better for the environment because especially fresh local food help to reduce food miles. It's also often much better ingredients because they are ingredients of high quality if they are fresh. It's better for your health or for the health of the guests because fresh food is higher in nutritional value. It's less likely to contain high levels of added sugars, salt, trans fats, and so on. Many studies also show that freshly prepared meals are more cost efficient. They have a greater sensory appeal, so the taste of freshly prepared meals is different and it can be very unique. And of course, if you use fresh ingredients, you have a greater variety what you can cook with these fresh ingredients, and it's easier to prepare a wider variety of dishes. So that all calls for offering more fresh food. So the next slide, please. But these are not the only benefits. What you can see here is a survey we have done among German package holiday travelers. And in this survey, with more than 7,000 German package holiday travelers, we found that the preparation of fresh food without using ready-made products or without using convenience products is the most important factor when it comes to food on offer on holidays. So it's also a very, very important attribute for the guests, and they appreciate when you prepare this food freshly. Next slide, please. Yeah, menu design. What can you do to create an attractive, sustainable food offer? Yeah, first you should put an emphasis on the composition of the menu. First, it is necessary to really think about the ingredients you choose. As I said before, focus on fruits and vegetables is important, and also to have a greater diversity across all the meals you offer. Try to vary the menu, especially including seasonal highlights, because seasonal food is also very healthy and very appealing to the customer. Then you can introduce food weeks or food months. This allows to vary the menu and adapt it to the different seasons, and also to adapt it to the availability of local food. And you can spotlight some of this local seasonal food and also create a nice story around it. And it's also offering an opportunity, it's also an opportunity for marketing. You should plan your food purchases carefully to avoid waste. That's an important consideration to take when planning the menu. Then, as I said already, try to cook fresh dishes without using processed and convenience food. Then also nice to offer like special occasion food like Easter treats or Sunday's lunch, and to show some local specialities. Plant-based culinary strategy to use more plant-based foods. This planetary health diet I just presented can serve as an orientation for implementing such a diet. And yeah, for this plant-based food, this has to be, of course, an attractive alternative to meat-based dishes. And what can help is to introduce certain flavor strategies. So to work with spices, herbs, other aromatics, and also to present it in a way with colorful fruits and vegetables to make it appealing to the guest and to make it unique and attractive. So as I already said, or it has been said also in the introduction, there are many recommendations what you can do. This is just a few of them, but you can't do everything at once. So therefore, it's important to focus on some specific goals, specific achievements you might have already reached, and then to set your priorities, how to develop your sustainable menu. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, now I'm going to talk about nudging, a term you might have already heard. Because when you have created such a sustainable menu, it's important that you think about how best to present your food to the customer. Because an appealing presentation will influence whether your guests will like the more sustainable menu or not. And in addition to an appealing presentation, you should also introduce a good information policy. Because a good information policy always helps to build trust between you and your guests, and it also creates value and a brand identity. It's really a good way to position yourself. Guests also appreciate to receive information about food. Also, a thoughtful presentation will help to reduce waste and leftovers. And this, of course, leads also to reducing costs. If you want to encourage your guests, because you have to have your guests on board, yeah, to really implement and your sustainable food offer, and so that it's also consumed. And you have to encourage your guests to make more sustainable food choices. And in order to encourage your guests, there is a technique of nudging, we call nudging, which comes into play, because nudging is a stimulus that changes people's behavior. And nudging is an intervention which is quite simple, which is often very cheap and not coercive. Typical nudging techniques, you know them, some of them already, in the hospitality industry, are, for example, offering smaller portions of meals, single servings, or using smaller bowls and plates. These are all measures to avoid food waste. The customers do not really see a negative measure in that. They often do not realize it, that you try with these nudging techniques to change their behavior. Also, a nudging technique would be to provide sustainable information in the form of signs and labels to the hotel guests, also in order to stimulate their sustainable behavior. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you see some nice pictures of food presentation opportunities. When it comes to the optimal presentation of your menu, here you see some tips for food presentation. First, you have to think about the size and the scope of your dishes. This is one of the most important elements in sustainable food presentation. And as I said already here, these nudging techniques will be implemented, like reduce the portion size and the plate sizes, and emphasize more on quality than on quantity. On the buffet, for example, use smaller container and replenish them regularly. This all will reduce food waste. And it's also, for example, a smaller plate is important for customer satisfaction, because it's much easier to make a small plate look full and the customer will be satisfied. I'm sorry. Then it's also, of course, how you present the menu. It's important because to make it look attractive, you can include colorful and fresh looking ingredients, which makes already an appealing presentation of the food. Could you please move to the next slide? Okay. So what's also important is that when you have designed your menu, you have a buffet and you have your sustainable offers, you should really highlight the sustainable dishes and make them more appealing to the customers. So the more sustainable food can be placed in the center, then they get the attention of the guests. Also, you could, and you see a picture of that, you could, on the bottom, you could install special attractive areas with sustainable food options, a table with organic food or with local specialities. So also to draw the attention of the guests to your sustainable dishes. Then playing with the color and textures of the dishes, also to draw the attention. They make the food look special. And also the garnishing of dishes is very important. Next slide, please. So also creating a pleasant atmosphere, eating atmosphere for the guests is important because they want to enjoy it. Guests want to enjoy their meal in a nice environment. So decoration of tables is important. Also very important for the guests is the information on raw ingredients next to the dishes. So for example, you could place tomatoes next to spaghetti with tomato sauce or so to foster an understanding among the guests of the origin of the food you use. And what is also very important is that you inform your staff and you communicate your food strategies also to your staff, because they have to be very well informed and about this sustainable food offer, because they recommend or may recommend the sustainable dishes. So this is very important that your staff is also well informed. And if you do some of these measures, the guests will have a great dining experience and will have very positive effects. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you see again results of our survey because it shows you how important it is that that you accompany your sustainable food offer with a good communication, because you have to communicate this sustainable strategy and what you have changed to actually make your guests understand this offer. And yeah, research has shown that many of these changes are failing because it's not communicated well. So communication is really a key issue when you introduce such a sustainable offer. It also helps to develop a positive image of the business and also creates marketing opportunities, because you can show what you make different and what you do for the environment and for the cultural heritage and so on. So you can make actually a quite unique offer and you have to communicate that. Our survey, as you can see here, also showed that this information about food is very important to guests. Or a majority of travelers want sustainable food offerings to be labeled in catalogs or online. They want to be informed about the origin and production methods of food. And they also want to find out already about the food and beverage offerings before they start their vacation. So this shows how important it is to communicate the sustainable food offerings to the guests. Yeah, now we move on to communication tools. And we'll talk about what you can do. And this recommendation stem out of a project which we have done in 2017, where we have developed communication tools to communicate two aspects of sustainable dining experience to guests. We have focused on the one hand side on promoting local products, and on the other side on the reduction of waste. And we have developed communication tools to influence the guests to behave in a certain way. And this was done in a co-design process with a number of hotels in Austria, Spain, and Turkey. And after we have developed these tools, we have done experiments to assess the impact of these tools and to see if they have been successful in changing the behavior of the guest. What stems out of this project is a guide including a set of communication tools. And I want to present the main findings now. So what can you do in order to inform your guests effectively? You should focus on certain information of your food offer, for example, on food production methods or animal welfare or the environmental impact of the food you offer. You can create informative food decks, very helpful for the buffet, where you can display the main ingredients of dishes. This might prevent food waste, trials of food and food waste. You can provide dietary and allergen information. This is actually law in European countries. And also other attributes of the food, which you can communicate through such food decks. It has to be proven very successful to put information on the tables in the dining room. And also very successful is the technique to use the technique of storytelling. So about your suppliers, you can name specific farmers and talk about their growing practices and so on, and connect your guests to these local suppliers. And always when you inform your guests, you have to do that in a positive way because the guests are on vacation and they want to enjoy their stay. So it's not good to communicate issues in a negative way. And what also helps is always to organize special days for tastings as a part also of the communication strategy. Now I will show you some examples. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are the tools we have developed and which we have also used in our experiments, and they are all available for free to everyone, so can be used and adjusted to your needs. And here you see a typical suppliers display, which should put the producer of food in the spotlight. What is the aim of this? It should ensure transparency about the origins of the ingredients. It could be placed, for example, on the buffet beside the relevant dishes. And the aim is also to raise awareness of the quality of the products, and especially by establishing a personal relationship with the producer and the guest. Sometimes hotels are also collaborating closely with the producers, and it offers an option and make the guests aware that they could, for example, do an excursion to the farm, or there could be tastings offered on the production sites. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is a display which focus on local products, so they make a local product stand out and can be also placed on the buffet. This display, for example, contains a short description of the product, so the origin or any special nutritional information. And we in our experiments, we used always 3 languages because these were the main guest groups, and so we wanted to address them in their own language. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you see some more buffet signage. On the left, there are pictograms which point out certain attributes of the dishes, such as local or CO2 emissions or organic. And these pictograms are also used on the buffet. They are stuck in or by the dishes, and they are placed so that they stand out. Often there is also, or we also presented an additional display, which then explained the big pictograms a little bit better. And here with these pictograms, we aimed to increase the choice of food, yeah, according to certain attributes. So the choice of local food or the choice of environmentally friendly food, or the preference for this food. Similar to that work the speech bubbles on top of this slide, because these tools, other than the pictograms, they somehow establish a direct line of communication between the food and the guests. So the speech bubbles speak to the guests, and we had short and snappy strap lines which highlighted the qualities of the food. So you see here, I'm a local hero, for example, yeah, pointing out that the dish or the dish is local. These speech bubbles also were attached to bowls or other dishes. Yeah, and then we also had food information tags, which, and I described it already above, gives information about ingredients and other important information to the guest. So they were very helpful to communicate certain information to the guests. Next slide, please. What else did we develop and use? You see here a display which was displayed directly at the table, and this is now about food waste. It outlines the measures that have been put in place and how guests can help to reduce food waste. I will explain that a little bit later. And another tool was a placemat, which could also be used to explain these ideas. Next slide, please. Yeah, now I want to talk about the effectiveness of this signage. As I said, we did experiments with these communication tools in hotels in Spain and in Turkey, and they showed really consistently positive results. So we combined several tools in the hotels. We had a poster in the lobby, we had the speech bubbles on the buffet, we had displays of local products, and we also had table displays. And what we could measure in this 1 week of intervention is that the consumption of local food increased by over up to 350% per product, which was a really significant increase. But also the reduction of edible plate waste was reduced by almost 15%. So both interventions changed the behavior of guests, and we had quite positive results. What we also found out is that the most effective information tool were the table displays, which were noticed by almost all consumers and was also read in detail by many guests, because guests had the time at the table to read them and to somehow interact with this information. Also, the speech bubbles at the buffet were noticed by about 90% of the guests. Less successful was the banner or the poster in the lobby, but attracted also about 70% of the guests, the attention of 70% of the guests. So can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so what makes a message a good message, and how did we, these were some basic considerations we had. A message has to be simple, so clear message, no big numbers, pictures if possible. It has to be fun, because holidays are fun, and it has to be positive. It has to be honest, so you should not claim anything what is not doable. And normal means that we invited to join in, with us, with the company, with businesses, with hotels, and with other guests. So, and the next slide will show an example for the waste intervention. Yeah, thank you. And here you see we had a very clear, simple message that 1/3 of the food on each plate is wasted, which is a correct is a fact, yeah? And that we can prevent 50% of this. So, and we also have illustrated that in a nice graphic so that it was really simple to understand. And then we showed our commitment, so what we do. And it was something like we handle food carefully so that less is wasted. We plan our buffet and we prepare fresh dishes and so on. So we showed what we are doing. And then we had this strapline of together against waste or united against waste. And then last but not least, we invited the guests to join. So what can they do in order to reduce waste? So these tools were quite effective, as I said, and again, they are available also, I think, in the One Planet repository. Next slide, please. And I will be short on that because we are already, towards the end of the time. I wanted just to show a good practice, which was realized in Cyprus, the Cyprus breakfast, and how they communicated their local food approach. And this was actually quite successful. They created this breakfast corners with participating hotels, with this local food, and they communicated well to the guests, which appreciated this offer very much, and also actually consumed local food outside of the hotel. Next slide, please, and that will be my last one. I just want to stress again that communication is really important because communication will support the change process towards more sustainable food offer. And as I said, research has already shown that many change processes do not work because there is not enough communication. And so you have to continuously communicate with your staff, with the guests. They have to understand the sustainable food policy in order to support this change process. And besides that, of course, this will create a positive image and create a lot of marketing opportunities. And with this last summary, I would like to close my presentation and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Dagmar, for excellent and very clear and comprehensive introduction of communication strategies that could be applied to promote more sustainable food as well as to prevent food waste. I'm just thinking while I was listening to your intervention, I think we will make sure also to add links to some of the visual materials that you were presenting directly in the page of this specific training, so that participants do not need to look for these tools in our repository of tools, so that they can directly access the link. I think it would be a good idea. So with Roxana, we will make sure that we do this just after this training, because I have seen that in comments several people are very interested by the tools that you were referring to, and we're asking where they can be found. So colleagues, if you use this QR code that appears on your screen, it will bring you to the page where you have all of the trainings that we have. So there you will be able to register to the next trainings. And you can see the schedule on your screen. So the next one will be on waste management on 30th of November. But there also, if you click on the pages of the previous trainings, you will be able to access the recordings of the trainings, as well as presentation materials for the previous trainings. So please use this QR code if you want to get additional information or consult previous trainings. So now I suggest, Dagmar, that we move to the Q&A sessions. We have 10 minutes left. So first, we have a very straightforward and question, and very practical one. what was written on this table displays so that they are that made them so compelling and so clear to the consumers. So on these displays that were placed directly on the tables of the consumers.
I have actually presented the text, or the do you want that in more detail?
Yes, if you
I
just
think it's about the table display, no? About the waste, the table display. As I presented, if you go back to the table display, I presented the approach we took. We wanted to inform them with a very simple message. What is the fact about food waste? So inform them about food waste and how important it is to actually reduce it. So then we took the approach that we informed them what we do as a business, as a hotel, so our measures, so that they see that we are committed and that we do something, and then we invited them to join in. So and there we told them, what can you do? So start with small portions, put less on the plate and go more often to the buffets. That was one message. The other one was find out about the ingredient of the dishes before you choose it. So to refer to the text we have placed there, so that you are, and wrote something that you are guaranteed to meet your taste. And then also because it was family hotels, then also an advice for the kids, let your kids taste from your plate to find your favorites. So these were very simple messages, what they could do to join in this joint effort to really reduce waste during the holidays. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Dagmar. I believe that we received this question before you went into a more in-depth explanation about food waste strategies. So I think you did answer the question. Thank you so very much. So next question that I would suggest is the one around the role of service personnel. So you have explained us different tools and different approaches to encourage guests, but what is exactly the role also of service personnel in the communication on sustainable food?
Yeah, service personnel is very important in the communication of sustainable food offers, because they are close to their guests, and they must give competent information about the sustainable food offerings. And they also are asked to recommend sustainable options, or they should recommend sustainable options. So what is important is that they are well trained, that they are informed about all aspects of your sustainable food offer. Another thing is that personnel also is important to provide feedback to the kitchen about the guest choices. For example, if they notice that from a certain dish there are lots of leftovers, and this observation, for example, needs to go to the kitchen, and so they have information, a two-way information task, to inform the guests, but also to feedback to the kitchen what might be a problem, or what is going well. And also what is quite interesting is that our studies also show that the presence of service staff at the buffet, for example, helps also to change guest behavior, because they are perceived somehow as a social control. So if service personnel is there, guests are more careful, or maybe better behaved, if we can say that. This is actually also true for the social control of other guests, that other guests also take control of the behavior or misbehavior of other guests. Very interesting phenomenon.
Indeed, very interesting. It kind of makes sense. I even recognize myself and what you're telling right now. Thank you very much, Dagmar. So the next question we received in the chat is the following. Some of local foods are more expensive than imported products, and cost is very critical in tourism business. So do you have solutions or recommendations with this regard?
Yeah, that's of course an argument. What I can say is, I mean, that's true. Yeah. If you have, or what I can say two things. Yeah, we have done studies and experiments about the willingness to pay of guests for high quality local food, and guests value local food and this authentic experience, you know, to eat traditional food and so on. Somehow for the guests, it's, you know, they experience the culture of the country they are in and they value that. And they are willing to pay more if you communicate that and if you present that in a very appealing way. Yeah, guests are ready to pay more for this experience. On the other side is also, you know, that you, of course, costs are always an argument, and you maybe should consider, you know, not to take the most expensive ingredients and try, for example, to have local products which are not that expensive, yeah, or negotiate prices directly with the producer, yeah. So it's very much dependent on the situation you are in, yeah. But what we can say is there are several studies on the willingness to pay, and for high quality, local, organic, authentic food, guests are willing to pay more.
Thank you very much, Dagmar. Yes, absolutely. In our program, we have been exploring for past years some strategies around also coordination with local producers or even collective procurement together with other stakeholders in the tourism industry based in a specific location that could be also of a help. And yes, as well, some communication strategies we have been recently exchanging with hospitality group based in Mauritius, and they were explaining that actually good communication was really life-changing in terms of also how valuable the local products are in terms of perception of consumers, and that indeed it's an investment that for them totally was totally justified. So on this, I think I suggest we close this session. Thank you again, Dagmar, for the excellent presentation. We have a lot of thank you messages from the participants. Thank you very much for our participants for their precious time, and of course to Futuris, for UNWTO, to governments of France for their support. And just a small reminder before we close in this session, our next training will be on waste management on 30th of November. Please register and please join us in 2 days' time. And thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you, Roxana. Thank you, Dagmar.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Jean.
you very much.
Bye.